My daughter insulted me to please her manipulative mother-in-law, so I canceled her wedding, exposed the truth, and watched their perfect plan implode. I never thought my late husband's wedding ring would become the reason my daughter called me the most selfish person in the world. My name is Eleanor Carter, and I'm 58 years old. For the past 12 years, I've served as the principal of Riverside High School, but that professional identity feels secondary to who I really am. A woman who once believed in forever, who learned the hard way that some promises end too soon. 8 years ago, on a rainy Thursday morning in November, my entire world collapsed when a police officer appeared at my office door with news that would reshape everything I thought I knew about life. David, my husband of 30 years, had been killed in a car accident during his commute home from his accounting firm downtown. That morning had started like thousands of others. David had woken up early, as he always did, brewing coffee in our small kitchen while I showered. I can still picture him perfectly, standing at the bathroom mirror in his white undershirt, carefully working his white gold wedding band back onto his finger after drying his hands. It was such a simple, routine gesture, one I'd watched him perform countless times over 3 decades of marriage. The ring itself was nothing extraordinary, a classic white gold band that we'd bought at a modest jewelry store when we were young and broke and desperately in love. But David had insisted on having it engraved, saving up his tips from his part-time waiter job to pay for the inscription, "Forever yours," written in his own careful handwriting, each letter painstakingly traced by the jeweler. Before leaving for work that final morning, he'd kissed my forehead with the same gentle affection he'd shown me every day since our wedding. "See you tonight, beautiful," he'd whispered against my skin, his wedding ring cool against my cheek as he cupped my face. Those were the last words my husband ever spoke to me, and that ring, that simple band of white gold with its promise of forever, became the most sacred object in my possession. My daughter Madeline is 26 now, a bright and ambitious young woman who works in marketing for a growing firm across town. She'd been dating Brandon Fitzgerald for 3 years when he proposed to her last spring, and I remember the joy that flooded through me when she called with the news. Finally, after years of grief and quiet dinners and holidays that felt hollow without David's laughter, something beautiful was happening in our family again. Brandon struck me as a genuinely good young man, respectful, hardworking, and clearly devoted to my daughter. He had steady employment at a local engineering firm, and treated Madeline with the kind of gentle consideration that reminded me, painfully, of how David had always treated me. Brandon's mother, Patricia Donovan, was a different story entirely. At 62, she owned Elegant Beginnings, the most successful bridal boutique in our mid-sized city, and she carried herself with the polished confidence of a woman who'd built her business from nothing. Patricia was always perfectly civil to me, never crossing the line into outright rudeness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she found me somehow inadequate. Her compliments came wrapped in subtle criticisms. She'd admire my quaint living room while suggesting that younger couples prefer more contemporary styles, or she'd praise my traditional cooking while mentioning that modern brides are so interested in fusion cuisine these days. When Madeline announced her engagement, my first instinct was pure maternal joy, followed immediately by a fierce determination to give her the wedding of her dreams. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. On a principal's salary, funding an elaborate wedding would mean sacrificing a significant portion of my retirement savings, money I'd been carefully accumulating since David's death. But the thought of my daughter starting her married life with anything less than perfection seemed unbearable. I wanted her to have everything David and I couldn't afford when we were young. The elegant venue, the photographer who specialized in capturing once-in-a-lifetime moments, the flowers that would make her feel like a princess. Within a week of the engagement announcement, I'd put down deposits at Riverside Country Club for the reception, hired Morrison's Catering, the most respected firm in the region, and even allowed Patricia to convince me to order a custom wedding gown from a designer whose name I'd never heard, but whose price tag made my hands tremble as I signed the contract. The dress alone cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, but Patricia assured me it was an investment in Madeline's happiness, and the kind of gown that creates memories for a lifetime. For several months, everything proceeded smoothly. Madeline and Patricia would visit my house 2 or 3 evenings each week, and we'd spread wedding magazines and vendor catalogs across my dining room table, debating the merits of different flower arrangements and menu options. These planning sessions felt warm and collaborative, Like the kind of mother-daughter bonding I'd always imagined but rarely experienced during Madeline's busy teenage years. Patricia would arrive with her leather portfolio and her reading glasses, efficiently organizing our discussions with the practiced skill of someone who'd orchestrated hundreds of weddings. But gradually, I began noticing subtle undercurrents that made me uncomfortable. Madeline and Patricia would exchange meaningful glances when I suggested certain traditions, like having the father-daughter dance play David's favorite song, or incorporating the blue and silver color scheme from my own wedding. Patricia had a way of steering conversations toward topics of family legacy and meaningful heirlooms, often wondering aloud whether I had any special pieces that might be incorporated into the ceremony. Madeline began asking increasingly pointed questions about David's belongings, casually mentioning how romantic it would be to include something of his in her wedding, how it would honor his memory and create a spiritual connection between past and future. At first, I found these conversations touching. Of course, I wanted David's memory to be part of Madeline's special day. I'd already planned to carry his photograph during the processional and to reserve an empty chair in the front row with a single white rose in his honor. But as the weeks passed, their inquiries became more specific, more focused on items of actual value rather than symbolic gestures. Then came that Tuesday evening in October that changed everything between us. Madeline and Patricia had arrived for what I assumed would be another routine planning session. We'd been discussing the centerpiece arrangements, Patricia favoring elaborate orchid displays while I advocated for simpler rose bouquets, when Madeline suddenly grew quiet. I recognized that particular expression from her childhood. The way her eyes would dart nervously before she asked for something she wasn't sure she'd receive. "Mom," she began, her voice carrying an unusual note of hesitation as she fidgeted with her engagement ring. "Patricia and I have been talking, and we've come up with what we think is a really beautiful idea for the wedding ceremony." I set down my coffee cup and smiled encouragingly, genuinely curious about what they'd planned. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Well," Madeline continued, glancing at Patricia for support, "you know how some families have these wonderful traditions where they pass down meaningful jewelry through the generations? Patricia thinks it would be incredibly romantic and meaningful if I could use Dad's wedding ring as my wedding band." The suggestion hit me with the force of a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face as I stared at my daughter, certain I must have misunderstood her words. "What?" Patricia leaned forward with that professionally warm smile she reserved for difficult customers, her voice taking on the smooth, persuasive tone I'd heard her use when selling expensive accessories to hesitant brides. "It's actually quite common, Eleanor, more common than you might think. Many families find it deeply meaningful to incorporate cherished pieces from previous generations into new ceremonies. It would be such a touching tribute to David's memory, and practically speaking, it would eliminate the need to purchase a separate wedding band. Really, it's a win-win situation for everyone involved." I felt my chest constrict as if someone had wrapped bands of steel around my ribs. David's ring, the ring I'd carefully removed from his still warm finger in that sterile hospital room, the ring I'd clutched during those endless, sleepless nights in our suddenly too large bed, the ring I still sometimes held when grief overwhelmed me, and I needed something tangible to prove that our love had been real. "I can't do that," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Madeline's face immediately fell into the disappointed expression she'd perfected as a teenager. "Why not? It's not like you wear it or anything, it's just sitting in your jewelry box." "Because it's his ring, Madeline," I said, my voice growing stronger as the initial shock faded into something closer to protective fury. "It's not just a piece of jewelry, it's the symbol of our marriage, our 30 years together, our entire life as a couple. I can't just lend it out like a borrowed book." "Lend it out?" Patricia's voice sharpened with apparent offense. "Eleanor, she's not asking to borrow it for some casual occasion. She's your daughter, requesting a family heirloom for her wedding day, one of the most important days of her entire life." "It's not a family heirloom," I replied, my voice taking on the firm authority I used with difficult students. "It's David's wedding ring. It stays with David's memory, where it belongs." Madeline's eyes filled with tears, but I could see they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of frustrated anger, the kind she'd cried as a child when she couldn't get her way. "Mom, this is incredibly selfish. Dad is gone. He doesn't need the ring anymore, but I need it for the most important day of my life. Can't you see how much this would mean to me?" The word selfish struck me like a slap across the face. How is it selfish for me to want to preserve the one physical reminder I have of my marriage to your father? Because you're choosing a dead man over your living daughter, Madeline snapped, her voice rising with indignation, and I watched Patricia nod approvingly, as if my daughter had finally made the point she'd been coached to make. I stood up from the table, my entire body trembling with a combination of hurt and rage I'd never felt toward my own child. I think you both need to leave, now. Eleanor, please don't be dramatic, Patricia said with calculated smoothness, her tone suggesting I was being unreasonable about a minor inconvenience. We're simply trying to create a beautiful family moment here, something meaningful that honors the past while celebrating the future. Surely David would want his ring to be part of his daughter's happiness, rather than locked away in a jewelry box where no one can appreciate it. Don't you dare tell me what David would want, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet that made both women suddenly still. You didn't know my husband. You never met him, never spoke to him, never witnessed the love he put into choosing that ring or the promises he made when he placed it on his finger. You don't get to speak for him, and you certainly don't get to rewrite the meaning of our marriage to suit your convenience. Madeline stood up as well, her face flushed with anger and something that looked uncomfortably like entitlement. Fine. Be selfish then. But don't expect me to be happy about it, and don't expect me to pretend I understand. Patricia's right, you obviously care more about some piece of metal than you do about my wedding or my happiness. After they left, I sat in my kitchen staring at David's ring, which I kept in a small velvet box on my dresser. Had I been wrong? Was I being selfish? But every time I imagined letting someone else wear it, even Madeline, I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just jewelry. This was the physical proof that David and I had existed, that our love had been real. The next few days were awful. Madeline wouldn't return my calls. When I ran into Patricia at the grocery store, she gave me a cold look and said, I hope you reconsider, Eleanor. Family is supposed to support each other. Then the phone calls started. My sister-in-law called, saying she'd heard about the ring situation and thought I was being a bit unreasonable. My neighbor mentioned that Patricia had told several people at the church coffee hour about how I was refusing to share family treasures with my own daughter. I started to feel like I was going crazy. Was everyone right? Was I being a selfish old woman clinging to the past? But then I overheard something that changed everything. I'd gone to Patricia's bridal shop to try to smooth things over, thinking maybe we could find a compromise. The shop was busy, and I was waiting by the dressing rooms when I heard Patricia talking to another customer. Oh, you're so smart to choose a family ring, Patricia was saying. I just convinced my future daughter-in-law to use her father's wedding band instead of buying a new one. Saved my son almost $2,000. These sentimental types are so easy to manipulate if you frame it right. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about tradition or sentiment. This was about money. Patricia had manipulated my daughter into demanding David's ring because she wanted to save money on Brandon's wedding expenses. I walked out of that shop with a crystal clear understanding of what I needed to do. That evening, I made a series of phone calls. First, I called the country club and canceled the reception venue. Then I called the caterer and canceled the dinner. Finally, I called Patricia's shop and canceled the wedding dress order. When my phone rang 20 minutes later, I was ready for it. Mom! Madeline's voice was shrill with panic. What did you do? The country club just called and said you canceled our wedding. That's right, I said calmly. Why would you do that? Are you completely insane? I'm not insane, sweetheart. I'm just being selfish. What are you talking about? You called me selfish for not wanting to give up your father's wedding ring. You said I care more about a piece of metal than about your wedding. So I decided you were right. I am selfish. I'm selfish with my money, just like I'm selfish with his ring. The silence on the other end was deafening. Mom, you can't be serious. You're going to ruin my wedding because I asked to borrow a ring? No, honey. I'm not ruining anything. I'm just not paying for it anymore. You're an adult woman with a job and a fiancé who also works. I'm sure you can figure out how to have a wedding without my selfish contribution. This is insane! Patricia, did you hear this? I could hear Patricia in the background, her voice high and panicked. Put her on the phone, I said. After some fumbling, Patricia came on the line. Eleanor, what is wrong with you? You're being vindictive and cruel. Am I? Or am I just refusing to be manipulated anymore? What are you talking about? I heard you, Patricia. At your shop? Telling another customer how you'd manipulated Madeline into asking for David's ring to save money. How sentimental types are easy to manipulate if you frame it right. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. I never said, "Don't lie to me." I heard every word. This was never about tradition or sentiment. This was about getting something valuable for free so your son wouldn't have to spend money on a wedding band. Eleanor, even if that's true, Madeline is still your daughter. Yes, she is. And as her mother, it's my job to teach her that she can't emotionally manipulate people to get what she wants. It's my job to show her that actions have consequences. I hung up on her. For the next 3 days, my phone rang constantly. Madeline called crying, then screaming, then pleading. Patricia called threatening to sue me for breach of contract. There was no contract. Brandon even called, confused and trying to mediate, asking if we could all just sit down and work things out. "Brandon," I told him, "ask yourself this. Do you want to marry someone who would hurt her own mother to save money on a piece of jewelry? Do you want to have Patricia as a mother-in-law, knowing how she operates?" He was quiet for a long moment. I didn't know she'd asked for your husband's ring. Madeline just told me her mom was being difficult about wedding jewelry. Now you know the truth. What you do with that information is up to you. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I was at home grading papers when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Madeline stormed up to my front door and started pounding on it. "Open this door right now. We need to talk." I opened the door to find my daughter looking haggard and desperate. Behind her, Patricia sat in the car with the engine running. "Mom, please, I'll apologize for whatever you want me to apologize for. Just please put the deposits back down. Please save my wedding." "Come inside," I said, alone. She looked back at Patricia, who waved her forward impatiently. Once we were in my living room, Madeline collapsed on the couch. "Mom, I don't understand why you're doing this to me. All I did was ask for a ring." "Madeline, do you love Brandon?" "Of course I do." "Do you love me?" "Yes, but..." "Then explain to me how love justifies trying to take away the most precious thing I have left of your father. Explain to me how love justifies calling me selfish and cruel when I said no. Explain to me how love justifies letting Patricia manipulate you into hurting me so she could save money." Madeline's face crumpled. She said it would be meaningful. She said Dad would want... Stop. I held up my hand. "Your father would want you to be kind to me. Your father would want you to respect my grief and my choices. Your father would be ashamed that you tried to take his wedding ring away from me to save Patricia Donovan some money." She was crying now, really crying. "I didn't think about it like that. Patricia made it sound so reasonable, and I wanted the wedding to be perfect, and I thought, you thought you could bully me into giving you what you wanted. Just like you used to do when you were 5 years old and wanted a toy at the store. That's not fair, isn't it? You asked for something that wasn't yours to ask for. When I said no, you called me names and tried to make me feel guilty. When that didn't work, you got other people to pressure me. When that didn't work, you tried emotional manipulation. Tell me how that's different from a child throwing a tantrum." She was sobbing now. "Mom, I'm sorry, I really am. But my wedding is ruined. Brandon is starting to ask questions about why his mom and I were so upset about a ring. People are talking. Please, just help me fix this." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. She was 26 years old, but in that moment, she looked like a child who'd broken something valuable and wanted Mommy to make it better. "Madeline, I will help you. But not until you understand what you did wrong. Not until you apologize for the right reasons, not just because you want something from me." "I am apologizing." "No, you're bargaining. You're saying sorry because you want me to pay for your wedding. That's not the same thing." She wiped her eyes, frustrated. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to understand that your father's wedding ring represents 30 years of marriage, thousands of days of love and commitment and partnership. I want you to understand that when you asked me to give it up, you were asking me to give up a piece of my soul. I want you to understand that when you called me selfish for protecting something sacred to me, you broke my heart." For the first time since this whole mess started, Madeline was quiet, really quiet. She sat on my couch staring at her hands, and I could see her actually thinking. "Mom," she said finally, her voice small, "I never thought about the ring that way. I just saw it as, I don't know, jewelry that wasn't being used. I didn't think about what it meant to you. Because you didn't ask. You just assumed you knew better than I did about my own grief, my own marriage, my own feelings. And Patricia saw an opportunity to save money and used your relationship with me to get it. She manipulated both of us, but you chose to go along with it." Madeline was quiet for another long moment. Then she said, "I don't think I can marry Brandon." That surprised me. "Why not?" Because if I could treat you this way, if I could be so cruel to my own mother over money and a wedding, what kind of wife am I going to be? What kind of person am I?" I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of the anger I'd been carrying. "Sweetheart, you're not a bad person. You made a mistake. A big one, but still a mistake. The question is what you're going to do about it." She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "What should I do?" "First, you should really apologize. Not because you want something from me, but because you hurt me and you're sorry about that. Then you should think about whether you want to marry someone whose mother would manipulate you the way Patricia did. And then you should decide whether you want to have a wedding that's paid for by emotional blackmail, or whether you'd rather have a wedding you can be proud of." Madeline stayed for 2 more hours. We talked about David, about marriage, about what it really means to love someone. She told me about the pressure she'd felt from Patricia, how the older woman had made her feel stupid and ungrateful for not asking for the ring. She told me about her fears that Brandon might not really love her if she couldn't give him the perfect wedding his mother wanted. When she finally left, she hugged me tighter than she had in years. "Mom, I'm really sorry. Not because I want you to pay for my wedding, but because I was cruel to you when you were just trying to protect something precious. I love you, and I should have trusted that you had good reasons for saying no. I love you too, sweetheart. That's why this hurts so much." Over the next month, everything fell apart for Patricia and came together for Madeline. Word got around town about how Patricia had manipulated the situation, and several of her customers canceled their orders. The church ladies who had been so quick to judge me suddenly found reasons to avoid Patricia at social events. Brandon, meanwhile, had a long conversation with his mother about her behavior. When Patricia refused to apologize or admit wrongdoing, he made a decision that surprised everyone. He moved out of her house and into an apartment across town. "I can't marry into a family that would treat the bride's mother the way you treated Mrs. Carter," he told Patricia. "And I can't have a mother who would manipulate my fiancé to save money on our wedding." But the biggest change was in Madeline herself. She got a second job waiting tables on weekends and started saving money for a smaller, simpler wedding. She called me every few days, not to ask for money or favors, but just to talk. She asked about David, about our marriage, about what had made our relationship strong. 6 months after that terrible Tuesday evening, Madeline came to my house with a small velvet box. "I bought myself a wedding band," she said, opening the box to show me a simple white gold band. "I had it engraved." I looked at the inscription, "Earned with love." "I realized that the most meaningful things in life aren't the ones we're given," she said. "They're the ones we work for, the ones we earn through our choices and our character." I started crying then, happy tears this time. Brandon and I are having a small ceremony in the church garden next month. Just immediate family and a few close friends. We're paying for everything ourselves. It won't be fancy, but it will be ours. It sounds perfect. Will you come? Will you walk me down the aisle? I wouldn't miss it for the world. 2 weeks before the wedding, I did something that surprised even me. I went to a jewelry store and bought Madeline a gift, a beautiful necklace with a small diamond pendant. For my daughter, I told her when I gave it to her, who learned that the most precious things in life can't be demanded or manipulated or stolen. They can only be earned. At her wedding, Madeline was radiant in a simple dress she'd bought off the rack and altered herself. Brandon looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Patricia was notably absent. Brandon had uninvited her after she'd made one last attempt to convince him that I was the real villain in the story. During the reception in the church fellowship hall, Madeline pulled me aside. "Mom, I need to tell you something. When I first asked for Dad's ring, it wasn't really because I thought it would be meaningful. If I'm being completely honest, it was because Patricia convinced me it would save money, and I was scared about the wedding costs. But that night when you canceled everything, I went home and really thought about what Dad's ring meant to you. I realized I was asking you to give up the symbol of the most important relationship in your life, just to save me a few $100s. I was so ashamed of myself. Sweetheart, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do. I need you to know that I understand now. I understand that some things are more important than money or convenience or even getting what we want. I understand that loving someone means respecting the things that are sacred to them. That night, I went home and took David's ring out of its box. I held it up to the light, reading the inscription "Forever Yours" that he'd had engraved 32 years ago. "You would be proud of her," I whispered to the empty room. "She's learned what real love looks like." I never regretted protecting David's ring, but I was grateful that my daughter finally understood there are some things in this world that can't be demanded or borrowed or taken. They can only be honored, cherished, and earned through the choices we make and the love we show. Some treasures are worth fighting for, even if it means being called selfish by the people who should understand their value the most.